We love our TV villains most when they make us uncomfortable, not because they're wrong, but because some tiny part of us suspects they might be right. These aren't characters who twirl mustaches and monologue about world domination. They're the ones who look at broken systems, broken worlds, and broken people, and decide the only honest response is to break the rules. Let's start with a cop who murders another cop in episode 1 and somehow keeps your loyalty for 7 seasons. Ivtei Maki, the Shield. Most TV anti-heroes ease you into it. They start as a loving father, a loyal husband, a guy you'd grab a beer with, and then somewhere around season 3, they're dissolving a body in a bathtub, and you're wondering when exactly you stopped rooting for the good guy. Vic Mackey doesn't give you that luxury. He murders a fellow police officer in the pilot episode, not the season finale. Not after some slow, tragic descent into moral compromise. Episode 1. The guy was an undercover plant sent to investigate Mackey's unit, and Vic shot him in the face during a raid and made it look like a gang killing. Then, the show looks you dead in the eyes and says, "So, you still watching?" And most people kept watching. Because here's the thing about Vic Mackey, he's not operating in some clean, well-funded precinct where the biggest problem is a parking dispute. He's running the strike team in the Farmington district of Los Angeles, a neighborhood so overwhelmed by gang warfare and institutional rot that traditional policing might as well be a suggestion box nobody checks. His crimes are extensive: drug dealing, extortion, police brutality, straight-up murder committed while wearing a badge. But the show does something deeply uncomfortable with all of that. It keeps showing you that his methods work. Gang violence drops. Dangerous leaders who've been terrorizing entire blocks for years get taken off the streets. And every single time a more by-the-book officer or civilian oversight reform gets introduced to clean things up the right way, they fail spectacularly. Gang leaders run circles around them, communities suffer. And then Mackey walks back in, breaks about 14 laws before lunch, and the problem gets handled. That's the utilitarian tension the show forces on you for 7 seasons. You're watching a man commit genuinely indefensible acts, and then the camera pans to a neighborhood that's measurably safer because of them. It's like someone handing you a math equation where the answer is correct, but the work is written in blood. But before you start thinking Mackey is some twisted Robin Hood with a badge, the show makes sure to remind you exactly who he is. His loyalty, the thing he constantly sells as his defining trait, has very hard limits. And those limits are shaped exactly like Vic Mackey. In the final episode, his partner Ronnie Gardocki, a guy who's been loyal to him for years, who's committed crimes alongside him, who trusted him completely, gets sacrificed. Mackey secures an immunity deal by confessing to everything, never telling Ronnie what's coming. Ronnie gets arrested, Vic walks free. The man who spent 7 seasons talking about protecting his people threw his closest remaining ally into a wood chipper to save his own skin. And that's what makes the secretly right argument so uncomfortable. Mackey's conception of the greater good always includes himself at the center. He'll protect the community, sure. He'll take down the gangs, absolutely. But the moment protecting someone else conflicts with protecting Vic Mackey, that someone else becomes collateral. His punishment is almost poetic in how cruel it is. He doesn't go to prison, that would be too clean. Instead, he gets assigned to a sterile federal desk job. A man whose entire identity is built on tactical dominance and street-level chaos gets sentenced to pushing papers under fluorescent lights. His family left him, his team is destroyed, his power is meaningless. He escaped consequences and lost everything that mattered in the same breath. But here's what makes his case genuinely unsettling. The show never tells you whether Farmington is better or worse without him. That's not an oversight, that's a choice. The writers deliberately leave that question unanswered, because if they showed the neighborhood thriving without him, his entire justification collapses and he's just a criminal. And if they showed it falling apart, they'd be endorsing the idea that a murderous cop was actually necessary. So they give you neither. They let you sit with it, and that's why Mackey is the most sympathetic villain on this list. Not because his methods are defensible, they're not, but because his cause, keeping a real neighborhood safe from real gangs that are really killing people, is immediately relatable in a way that grand political schemes never quite manage. You understand why someone in that environment might break the rules. You just can't forgive how far he took it, but if you think a corrupt cop gaming the system is disturbing, wait until you meet a politician who turned manipulation into an art form. Frank Underwood, House of Cards. Most TV villains at least pretend they're saving someone, a city, a family, the entire world. Frank Underwood doesn't bother with any of that. His cause is Frank Underwood, and the terrifying part isn't that he's selfish, it's that the show keeps proving his version of reality correct. Let me explain. Frank Underwood climbs from House Majority Whip to President of the United States through a combination of deception, manipulation, and straight-up murder. We're talking at least 6 direct kills, numerous indirect deaths, mass-scale corruption, conspiracy, torture, abuse of power, the full buffet. He doesn't stumble into any of this. Every move is calculated, every betrayal is premeditated, and every body is a stepping stone, which is, not ideal for a public servant. But here's the thing about Underwood that separates him from your standard power-hungry villain. He's not delusional, he's not impulsive, he's not even particularly emotional. He has been described as probably the least crazy person in Washington, ruthless and cunning, but always rational and consistent rather than erratic. Every decision follows a coherent internal logic. You might hate the logic, but you can't call it irrational. And that's what makes him dangerous, not the murders, the reasoning behind them. His entire worldview is explicitly Machiavellian, and I don't mean that as a casual insult. Niccolò Machiavelli literally argued that political success requires presenting a carefully maintained false appearance. You project virtue while practicing ruthlessness. You smile while you sharpen the knife. Frank subscribes to this completely. In public, he's the disciplined, principled leader. In private, he's the guy suffocating a dog in the first 10 minutes of the show because it was suffering. And there are two kinds of pain. Cool. Add that to the list. And those fourth wall-breaking monologues? They're not just a stylistic choice. They're a seduction. Frank turns to the camera, looks you directly in the eyes, and explains exactly why each morally repugnant act is supposedly necessary. He lets you into the reasoning. He makes you complicit. He's basically saying, you and I both know this is how it works. I'm just the only one honest enough to say it out loud. And the uncomfortable truth is that the show validates this framing over and over again. Characters who try to play fair get eaten alive. Characters who compromise survive. Frank just took that lesson and ran with it harder than anyone else was willing to. Here's where it gets complicated. Every time a supposedly principled opponent shows up to challenge Underwood, the show pulls back the curtain and reveals their own skeletons. The righteous senator has a secret deal. The crusading journalist has compromised sources. The idealistic president was propped up by the same backroom deals Frank uses. The moral distinction between Underwood and everyone else in Washington isn't qualitative, it's quantitative. They're all playing the game. He's just better at it and more honest with himself about what the game actually is. Frank, what you're doing is wrong. Sure, what are you doing? Also wrong, but quieter. And occasionally, Underwood pursues policies that could genuinely be construed as beneficial, entitlement reforms. Pragmatic foreign policy decisions, rational responses to structural problems that nobody else in Washington had the spine to touch. These moments make it impossible to write him off as pure evil. He's not the Joker, he's not chaos for chaos's sake. He's a man who looked at a broken machine and decided the best way to fix it was to own it entirely, consequences be damned. The fact that some of those consequences include people dying is, in Frank's calculus, just the cost of doing business, and he never loses a second of sleep over it. Now, the misconception people fall into is thinking the show endorses all of this. It doesn't. House of Cards uses Frank's success as an indictment of the system that allows someone like him to rise. Every triumph he achieves is simultaneously a failure of institutional safeguards. Every scheme that works exposes another vulnerability in democratic governance. The show isn't saying Frank is right, go be like Frank. It's saying the fact that Frank can do this should terrify you, but that doesn't erase the discomfort of watching him and thinking, yeah, he kind of has a point about how this works. Compare him to Mackie for a second. Mackie's cause is protecting a community, even if his methods are criminal. There's a tangible external good he can point to. Underwood's cause is himself dressed up as political realism. He wraps naked ambition in the language of necessity and dares you to prove him wrong. And the worst part, nobody in the show really can. The system rewards moral compromise and punishes idealism at almost every turn. Underwood just had the audacity to say that out loud while looking directly at the camera. He's not a villain who thinks he's a hero. He's a villain who thinks heroes are a myth, and he's got 6 seasons of evidence suggesting he might not be entirely wrong about that. That's not a comforting thought, but nobody said great television was supposed to be comfortable. But if Frank Underwood represents cynicism about the system we already have, wait until you meet someone who wanted to tear down reality itself and build a new one from scratch. White Rose, Mr. Robot. Every other villain on this list has a cause you can point to. Gang violence, political corruption, things you can see, measure, and verify with your own eyes. White Rose is different. White Rose asks you to believe in something the show never once confirms is real. Here's the setup. White Rose is the leader of the Dark Army and Mr. Robot, simultaneously operating as a high-ranking political figure within the Chinese government under a completely separate identity. 2 lives, 2 faces, 1 obsession. And that obsession is a mysterious project housed at the Washington Township power plant that she's been protecting for decades. Not years. Decades. While other people were building careers and raising families, White Rose was funneling resources, eliminating obstacles, and constructing something that nobody around her fully understood. By 1995, she had already risen to enough power within the Dark Army to orchestrate the assassination of E-Corp's CEO, Lester Moore, in a plane crash. And before you assume this was some personal grudge, it wasn't. Moore was blocking her access to the Washington Township plant, and she needed that plant, so she removed him. Calculated, clean, and absolutely terrifying in its efficiency. She didn't kill him because she hated him. She killed him because he was standing between her and the project. Which is, not ideal for Lester. The man's only crime was being an inconvenience, and White Rose treated him like a speed bump on the highway to cosmic enlightenment. So what exactly is this project? Here's where it gets complicated because the show deliberately never gives you a straight answer. What we do know is that White Rose describes it as an effort to open the doors to parallel universes. Her stated goal is to create a better world, one where painful personal losses can be reversed, where injustice can be corrected, where reality itself gets rewritten from scratch. She's not trying to rule the world or accumulate wealth. She genuinely believes she can hit the cosmic reset button and fix everything that's ever gone wrong, and she's sincere about it. That's the part that makes her so difficult to dismiss. This isn't some front for a power grab. White Rose has experienced real devastating personal loss, and her entire project is fueled by the conviction that those losses don't have to be permanent. She looks at reality and says, no, I reject this, I can build something better. On paper, that's almost heroic. On paper, she sounds like the protagonist of a completely different show. But here's the thing. The project has already killed people. Real, documented, not coming back in any universe, people. Radiation emitted from the Washington Township plant contributed to the deaths of Emily Moss and Edward Alderson, the parents of key characters in the show. Both of them worked at or near the plant. Both of them were unknowingly contributing to the very project that was slowly killing them. Let that sink in for a second. The machine that's supposedly going to create a better world already destroyed the world of the people who helped build it. Emily and Edward died so White Rose could pursue a reality where, theoretically, people like Emily and Edward don't have to die. That's not irony. That's a closed loop of cruelty dressed up as hope. And this is where White Rose becomes the most philosophically interesting case on this entire list. Every other villain we've talked about has a cause grounded in observable reality. You can look at Farmington and see the gang violence. You can look at Washington and see the corruption. Those things are verifiable. White Rose's cause requires faith. Pure, unverifiable, trust me on this faith in a project that nobody fully understands, that the show never confirms actually works, and that has already produced a body count. She's essentially running a religion with a particle accelerator instead of a church. The full nature of the project remains canonically unknown. That's not me being cagey. The show intentionally withholds whether her vision is achievable. Fan theories about time travel and parallel universes are fascinating, and some of them are genuinely compelling, but they remain speculative rather than confirmed, which means White Rose might be sacrificing real documented human lives for what could be nothing more than an elaborate delusion. A beautiful, emotionally resonant, deeply personal delusion, but a delusion nonetheless. And she's asking everyone around her to accept that trade. Give me your lives, your labor, your silence, and trust that the world I'm building will be worth it. That's an enormous ask when the person making it can't actually prove the destination exists. At least Frank Underwood's cynicism about politics is something you can verify by turning on the news. White Rose is promising a parallel universe. The gap between those two claims is the size of, well, a parallel universe. The devastating part is that her grief is real. Her desire to undo suffering is real. Her conviction that the world as it exists is fundamentally broken is something millions of people would agree with. She's not wrong about the problem. The question is whether her solution is genius or madness, and the show refuses to tell you which one it is. She could be the most important visionary in human history. She could also be a grieving woman who built a machine that poisons people and does nothing else. The show looks you dead in the eye and says you decide, which is honestly more unsettling than just giving you an answer. That ambiguity is what makes her terrifying. Not the assassinations, not the Dark Army, the fact that she might be completely right, or she might be completely delusional, and there is zero way to know until it's too late. Everyone who dies for her project dies on faith alone. No receipts, no guarantees, just the word of a woman who killed a CEO because he was in the way. But if you think sacrificing lives for an unproven theory is disturbing, wait until you meet the guy who sacrificed millions for a theory he was absolutely certain about. Adrian Veidt Ozymandias, Watchmen. Adrian Veidt is the smartest man in the world, and he wants you to know it. He's a former costume vigilante, a billionaire businessman, and the kind of guy who named himself after a poem about the futility of power, which is either deeply ironic or deeply telling. And on November 2nd, 1985, at the stroke of midnight, he teleports a giant genetically engineered squid creature into the middle of New York City. 3 million people die instantly, not soldiers, not combatants, not people who signed up for anything. Office workers, children, cab drivers stuck in traffic. 3 million ordinary human beings who woke up that morning with no idea that the smartest man alive had already decided they were acceptable losses. In the film version, it's even worse. 15 million across multiple major cities vaporized by energy blasts designed to mimic Dr. Manhattan's signature. And here's the thing that separates Veidt from every other villain on this list. He planned every single detail. He knew exactly how many people would die. He knew there would be children. He ran projections. He built models. He stress tested the variables. And then he did it anyway. Not for revenge. Not for money. Not because he enjoyed it. He did it because he ran the numbers and decided that 3 million dead now was better than 7 billion dead later. His reasoning is a straightforward utilitarian calculus. The United States and the Soviet Union are hurtling toward nuclear war. The doomsday clock is ticking. Diplomatic channels are failing. Every back-channel conversation is collapsing under the weight of paranoia, posturing, and mutually assured destruction. And Veidt, watching all of this from his Antarctic fortress like history's most overdressed meteorologist, concludes that the only way to stop humanity from annihilating itself is to give it something bigger to be afraid of. Fake an alien invasion. Unite the world against a common enemy. Force peace through shared terror. And here's where it gets complicated, because his plan works. In the immediate aftermath, nuclear tensions decline. The superpowers move toward cooperation. The missiles stay in their silos. By every measurable metric in the short term, Adrian Veidt saves the world. He commits the largest act of mass murder in human history, and it produces exactly the outcome he predicted, which means the audience is stuck in the most uncomfortable position a story can put you in. You're watching a man who just killed millions of innocent people, and you can't say he was wrong. At least not about the result, but here's the kicker. You absolutely can say he was wrong about something else. Veidt's entire justification rests on one assumption: that nuclear war was inevitable, that diplomacy had failed, that there was zero path to peace that didn't involve a mountain of corpses and a fabricated alien threat, and that assumption is, at best, debatable. At worst, it's catastrophically arrogant, because the history of the Cold War, even within the fictional universe of Watchmen, is full of moments where tensions rose to terrifying heights and then receded, where leaders blinked, where public opinion shifted, where the species stumbled backward from the edge, not because of some grand scheme, but because enough people in enough rooms decided that ending the world was, not ideal. The counter-argument against Veidt isn't that his math was bad, it's that his premise might have been wrong. And if nuclear war wasn't inevitable, then he didn't save the world. He just murdered 3 million people for nothing. That's not a rounding error. That's not a miscalculation you shrug off. That's the kind of mistake that turns your legacy from savior of humanity to history's most articulate mass murderer. That's what makes him the most philosophically provocative villain on this list, and simultaneously, the least sympathetic. He's essentially the trolley problem scaled up to genocide. Pull the lever, kill millions, save billions. Except he's the one who decided the trolley was coming. He's the one who assessed the tracks. He's the one who built the lever, grabbed it without asking a single other human being whether they consented to being part of his thought experiment, and pulled it with the confidence of a man who has never once considered the possibility that he might be wrong. He unilaterally appointed himself the moral arbiter of the entire species, made the most consequential decision in human history based on his own assessment, and then sat back in his palace waiting for a thank you that was never going to come. And the peace he builds. It's founded on a lie. Every moment of cooperation between the superpowers, every handshake, every disarmament treaty, all of it sits on top of a fabrication. The alien isn't real. The threat isn't ongoing. And human nature, as the narrative repeatedly hints, hasn't actually changed. The political structures that nearly caused nuclear war are still intact. The tribalism is still there. The ideological divisions haven't evaporated. The fear is just temporarily pointed in a different direction, which means the peace could unravel the moment someone discovers the truth, or the moment the fear fades, or the moment some new geopolitical crisis reminds everyone that they hate each other more than they hate the thing that isn't coming back. Rorschach's journal is sitting in a newspaper office. The fuse is already lit. Veidt doesn't fix humanity. He scares it into behaving for a while, and he kills 3 million people to buy that window, which is, not ideal. Every villain on this list articulated something true. Mackie was right that the system couldn't protect Farmington through conventional means. Underwood was right that politics rewards ruthlessness and punishes idealism. White Rose was right that the world is broken in ways that incremental reform can't touch. And Veidt was right that nuclear brinkmanship was an existential threat to the species, but being right about the diagnosis doesn't mean the surgery was justified. Every single one of them crossed a line that turned their correctness into something that looks less like vindication and more like a curse. They saw the problem clearly. They understood it better than anyone around them. And then they chose methods so extreme that their rightness became irrelevant. The insight that made them compelling is the exact same insight that made them monsters. That's the uncomfortable truth about villains who are secretly right. The right part makes you listen. The secretly part makes you wonder. And the villain part is the one that sticks. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.